Hello and welcome to today's video of News for English Learners. Don't forget these videos are aimed at people who are currently learning English or who have perhaps studied English in the past and have a certain level but want to expand their vocabulary, their knowledge of English words and phrases and idioms. Now I have quite a collection of videos, around about 26, I think. I think this is number 27. There's probably more than 100 words and phrases that I've covered. So what I'm going to do is put a list of all the words in the video description so you can download that, have a look at it, and if there's any particular word or phrase that you want to focus on or go back and review, you can skip to the video and to the relevant part of the video, because all the videos are divided into chapters. This week's article is about archaeology, and it's about a recent discovery in the Ecuadorian Amazon in the jungle, and it's the discovery of a new city, of an ancient civilization. So let's have a look at the first paragraph. Archaeologists have discovered a huge ancient lost city in Ecuador. The city, which covers a vast area, was hidden under the dense vegetation for centuries. The city was built around 2,500 years ago and thrived for up to 1,000 years, according to archaeologists. The city had a sophisticated network of roads and houses and was a hive of activity with thousands of inhabitants. The discovery challenges the common perception that the Amazon was a pristine wilderness only populated by small groups of nomadic or semi-nomadic people before the European conquest. So let's have a look at the first two words together because they're actually quite similar. Both of them are adjectives. The first one is pronounced huge and the second is pronounced vast. And they're both used to talk about things that are extremely big, in a similar way to another adjective like enormous. We can talk about a huge animal like a whale. A blue whale is a huge animal. It's the biggest animal that has ever lived on the earth. In the past, there were other huge animals like dinosaurs. They tended to be very big as well. So it can be the size of something, or it can be a very large number of something or quantity of something. The word vast in many cases can be used more or less in the same way as huge, but it tends to be more focused on the extent of something. So something that covers a large area, as in this case, the city covers a vast area. But again, it does mean very big or very large. So moving on to the next word. This is another adjective, and this is pronounced dense. When we talk about something that is dense, it basically means there's a large quantity of something in a small area. So if we think of density of population, by the way, density is the noun form here, we are talking about the number of people that live in every square kilometer. Some cities or places which have a very high density are very crowded. There's a lot of people living in a small area. The city where I live, Barcelona, is quite densely populated. It's a city of about between, let's say, 1.5 and 2 million people, but it's not very extensive. It's not vast. It basically because it's between the sea and a mountain range, and also there are two other towns on either side of it. So it's pretty well contained. It cannot grow anymore. Of course, there are other cities around the world which have a much higher population density. So in a similar way here, when we talk about dense vegetation, we're talking about a large quantity or a huge quantity of trees and bushes and other plants in a relatively small area. So they're all crowded together. Just think of the typical image you see of the Amazon rainforest, right? There are many different sizes of trees, some growing very tall, some shorter, but every square centimeter, every square meter of land is covered with vegetation. So it is extremely dense. So the final example I could give you could be from weather. If we talk about the phenomenon of fog, when the air temperature goes down and the water vapor in the air condenses, we get the phenomenon which is called fog. Now, sometimes that fog can be very dense or thick. So that means it's very difficult to see very far because there's so much moisture in every cubic centimeter of air. It makes it very difficult to see. So the next word we come across here is the regular verb to thrive. The basic meaning of thrive is to grow or develop or to be successful. I guess one of the key examples could be if we think of growth, think of plants. Now, if you have a plant in your home or your garden and you look after it very well, you water it, you put fertilizer on it, you cover its basic needs, then it should thrive. It should grow really well and develop and get bigger and grow new leaves. Also, we often use this word when we're talking about businesses as well. When you open a business, when you set up a business, it can go one of two ways, really. It can either fail. A lot of businesses fail within the first year or so. But if you place your business well and you plan it very well, and you're providing a service or a product that is in high demand, then your business should thrive. It should grow and develop and ultimately make you a lot of money. Now, in this case, we're talking about a civilization or a city that grew and developed and got bigger and was successful for many, many years. So let's move on to the next word. This is the noun hive. Now, a hive generally, or literally, I should say, is the home of a certain insect, which is called a bee. Bees are the insects which collect pollen and make honey, and they store that honey in a place called a hive. So it's kind of like a nest. A nest is for birds, and a hive is for bees. Now, in this case, we're using this word figuratively, so it's not literally a bee's house. What we're talking about is we're making a comparison really between the busy bees who are always flying around and working very hard and this ancient city that at its most successful, when it was thriving, there were, of course, many thousands of people there. So you can imagine it would be very, very busy, almost like a modern city is today. So it's that comparison between the hive where the bees live and they're working very hard, and people in a city who are also going about their daily business, working and traveling and doing all the things that we normally do in a city. Okay, so the next word, or in fact phrase we have here is pristine wilderness. So this is an adjective combined with a noun. The adjective pristine basically means something that it's new or very good condition, or perhaps it is untouched by humanity. It is in its original state, virgin, if you like. Very difficult to find anywhere like that in the modern world because humans have spread out and covered almost every square centimeter. But if you go back in the past, of course, the human population was not so big and there were still places around there without any people living there or in their original state. So in this case, the adjective pristine is combined with this noun, wilderness. So a wilderness is a place which is wild. That's the adjective form. And a wild place is somewhere which has not been kind of domesticated or tamed. It has not undergone transformation by agriculture. It does not have any human cities or villages or settlements. It is, in this case, jungle, right? The Amazon is a jungle, and before the Europeans arrived, the original perception was that there were no cities in the Amazon. There were only local nomadic tribes who would live in harmony with the Amazon without building any permanent settlements. And that idea seems to be slowly being eroded by the discoveries that are being made in the Amazon jungle of quite well-developed civilizations and large cities and settlements. So moving on to the next paragraph. Researchers are now piecing together the puzzle and believe it was part of a larger cluster of cities that spanned across the Amazon basin, forming a civilization that rivaled the Inca and Maya empires in size and complexity. The researchers used a technique called LiDAR, light detection and ranging, which involves shooting laser pulses from an aeroplane or a drone and measuring the reflected signals to create a detailed 3D image of the terrain. The technique can cut through the thick canopy of trees and reveal structures that are invisible to the naked eye. The researchers also conducted archaeological excavations at some of the sites and found artifacts such as pottery, stone tools, ornaments, and human remains. They also collected samples of charcoal and soil for radiocarbon dating and analysis. So, if we look at the first phrase we have highlighted here, it is the idiom to piece together the puzzle. So really we need to understand, what is a puzzle? Well, in this case, it's really referring to a kind of puzzle called a jigsaw puzzle, which you probably have seen at some point in your life. It's a relatively large picture that is cut into little pieces which have intricate shapes, and when the pieces are all mixed together, your task is to fit them in the correct order so that you can recreate the picture. And that is the kind of metaphor here that's used in this idiom. When you are piecing together a puzzle, you are looking for clues that fit together. So in this case, the researchers are looking for evidence on the ground. They have done archaeological excavations where they found pottery and stone tools and human remains. So they are using those pieces of the puzzle to build a comprehensive picture of what life was like at that time when the city was growing and full of people. So it is that metaphor, therefore, of solving a puzzle by looking for individual bits of evidence and slowly building up a larger picture, as you do when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle. Okay, so let's move on to the second word. This is the noun cluster. This can also be used as a verb. It's a regular verb, so it would be clustered in the past. When we use this word, both as a noun and a verb, we're talking about a group of objects that are closely arranged in their position. So imagine groups of people who are clustered around the notice board looking at exam results, for example. Or imagine a cluster of galaxies. If you've ever seen a picture of space, which has been taken through a powerful telescope, those telescopes can peer into the distant past and see a time when galaxies were closer together than they are now. And those are called galaxy clusters. We can also talk about a cluster of events, when events are grouped together closely in time. And even if we think of viruses, the spread of viruses, usually when viruses begin to spread, like was the case with COVID, there are certain clusters of cases because, of course, viruses being contagious, they spread from one person to another. Usually this takes time, so usually there are little groups where the virus is spreading very rapidly until it spreads to a larger area. So in this case, it's talking about the cities being grouped together over a vast area. So let's move on to the next word we have. So this is the regular verb rivaled. Can also be used as a noun, rival, and an abstract noun, rivalry. When we talk about rivalry, we're basically talking about competition. So it's two people or entities that are competing against each other. Perhaps they have a similar or the same objectives. If we think about business rivalry, then rivals in the business sphere will both be competing for perhaps the same customers. So therefore, they are almost fighting against each other. If we talk about political rivalry, well, perhaps people belonged to different political parties, so they are constantly fighting against each other or competing against each other for the votes of the people. If we talk about sibling rivalry, your siblings are your brothers and sisters, and quite often there are rivals, particularly if the siblings are of a similar age, that can end in a bad situation where there is actual physical fighting going on. So when we talk about rival as a verb, what we're saying is that something is trying to compete on the same level. It's as good as something else. So in this case, the article is saying that this civilization, this newly discovered civilization, rivals that of the more famous Inca and Maya empires, both in size and complexity. So it is of a similar level. It is able to compete with them. The next word we have here is the noun pulse, which can also be used as a regular verb. When something pulses, it moves at regular intervals, or it emits something like light at regular intervals in short, sharp bursts. So if we look first of all at the human body, when the heart is pumping blood around the body, it does it at regular intervals. We call it the heartbeat. Well, we can also talk about the pulse. If you put your fingers on your wrist, you can feel that regular rhythmical movement of blood around your body, and that is called your pulse. So similarly, when we're talking about a laser, which is emitting pulses of light, it is emitting that light at regular, consistent, short, sharp intervals. We do also use this word in an idiomatic expression, which is to have or keep your finger on the pulse. So just as I told you, when you place your fingers on your wrist and you feel your pulse, you're detecting those little impulses of blood flowing around the body. Well, somebody who has their fingers on the pulse, generally in an organization or a business, will be in complete control. They'll be aware of everything that's going on in that organization. They will be fully up to date. And therefore, usually those people make quite good managers because they can use that information to control situations or solve problems. So it's always good to keep your finger on the pulse. So moving on to the next phrase, we have to cut through. So this is a phrasal verb. The basic meaning of cut, you're probably familiar with. You can cut things with a knife or with scissors. You can use to cut paper or your hair. However, to cut through something indicates that you're actually penetrating it. So a good example of this physically could be cutting through the jungle. Imagine you're an explorer going to a part of the Amazon that has never been explored before. So it's the vegetation is extremely dense. And in order to make a path, you need to use a large knife or machete to cut through the trees and the bushes and the plants, to cut through that vegetation. It is often used also, slightly more metaphorically, when we talk about cutting through red tape. Now, the phrase red tape is used very commonly in English to refer to bureaucracy. The reason for this is because in the UK, I'm not sure if it still goes on, but in the past, most official documents would be tied up with actual real red tape. And that idea today is used to talk about any official government business or bureaucratic processes that we have to go through. And obviously red tape is not very popular because usually it's considered a waste of time if it is excessive. So people will always try to cut through that red tape. and get rid of unnecessary bureaucracy. Now, in this case, we are talking about the laser pulses from the LiDAR cutting through or penetrating the thick canopy of trees. So that brings us on to the next couple of words here. Thick is an adjective. It's the opposite of thin. If we talk about an object, well, let's think of a book. A book with many pages is very thick. A book with a few pages is thin. But we can also use thick in a similar way to the word we looked at before, dense. When we're talking about a liquid that is thick, we're talking about its viscosity. It is viscous. So it is difficult to move through because of how thick it is. And in this case, the canopy of the trees is very thick. It's very dense. Now, a canopy is generally something that covers you or protects you from above. So if you go to the beach and you don't want to get sunburn or you don't like the sun very much, you might use a kind of parasol. That is a kind of canopy. It's protecting you from the sun and giving you shade. In a similar way, when we talk of the canopy of the trees, it is all the trees that are so closely spaced that they are providing a lot of shade to the other plants and animals at the bottom. So in this case, the technique that they use in the LiDAR can actually penetrate that canopy and reveal or show structures that are hidden underneath, that cannot be seen because of the high density of trees. So the final phrase we have here is radiocarbon dating. This refers to a technique used by archaeologists where they can use scientific analysis to put an age on certain organic materials like charcoal or soil. The technique relies on the fact that living organisms accumulate a radioactive isotope of carbon during their lives, and when they die, that radioactive isotope starts to decay. So the amount of it actually decreases with the passage of time. So by measuring that quantity that is left in the sample, they can actually date organic materials quite accurately. So in this case, by using this technique, the archaeologists have been able to say when this city was active. The main limitation of it is that it cannot be used to date things made out of stone, minerals. It's only used for organic things, so things that once lived. So let's read the final paragraph. The researchers estimate that thousands of people lived in the city at its peak between 500 BCE and 500 CE. They had a distinctive pottery style, practiced agriculture and metallurgy, and traded with other regions. One of the most remarkable features of the city is its layout, which reflects a high degree of planning and engineering. The platforms are arranged in groups forming neighborhoods. The city's location near the Sangay volcano may have been both a blessing and a curse. The volcano's eruptions made the soil fertile for agriculture, but they also posed a constant threat of destruction. The researchers believe that a major eruption around 500 CE may have caused the collapse of the city and forced its inhabitants to abandon it. So if we turn to the first word highlighted, it is the noun peak. We can also use it as a verb as well, but I think it's helpful to think of it as a noun first, because when we use this noun to talk about a mountain, we are essentially talking about the very top, the summit, it's sometimes called. It is the place where most mountain climbers want to reach when they climb a mountain. So the peak of something is the very top of it. And similarly, we use it figuratively in this case to talk about the peak of its success or its development. The city reached its zenith, the highest point between about 500 BCE and 500 CE. That is the period when it was most highly developed and most successful. So if we talk about peak performance of something, perhaps you are training for a marathon or for some kind of a race. As an athlete, it's very important to peak at the right moment, to reach your highest potential or your highest performance at the right moment. Okay, so let's move on to the next word. We have this adjective, distinctive. When something is distinctive, it stands out from the crowd. It's not normal, it's not boring, it's not mundane, it is different. In this case, it's saying that the pottery style found in this newly discovered city is different from other areas, particularly from the Maya and the Inca. It is easily recognizable. It's characteristic of that civilization. Perhaps you have a very distinctive way of dressing, or maybe you have a distinctive hairstyle. That means, of course, that everybody recognizes you instantly because you are different. You stand out from the crowd. The next word we come across here is the regular verb to trade. Trading is an activity that has been going on for thousands of years. It is basically when groups of people or nations exchange goods and services. They buy and they sell. Now, of course, in the modern world, we generally use money as the means of exchange, but even in primitive societies, they traded, as we've seen here. They didn't have money, but they could simply exchange one good for another good. This is a system which is called barter in English. That means that it had a certain level of sophistication, certain level of organization. So it really means that it was a quite advanced civilization. Okay, so let's move on to the next word. This is the noun layout. Now, this is very closely connected with the phrasal verb to lay out. So if we think of laying out things, it means that you're putting them in position in a particular order. Maybe you want to organize your books, so you take them off the shelf and you lay them out on the table, and then you sort them according to some criteria which you have. Or maybe you're doing the laundry, and before you put the clothes away, you lay them all out and fold them neatly and then put them in the wardrobe or cupboards. So when we talk of a layout, it is essentially that idea. It's the positioning of certain things in a particular way. Graphic designers lay out things on the screen to make them more attractive. And of course, when people are planning buildings or cities, they lay out the facilities or the structures in a particular way. In this case, the city was laid out with a very high degree of planning and engineering. So it was not just randomly, chaotically, organically built. There was a degree of planning involved in which the layout was specified. Okay, so let's move on to the final couple of words. These two words kind of go together because they're almost like opposites. We talk first of all of a blessing. The verb is to bless. It's a regular verb. And a curse. A curse is also can be used as a verb, also regular, cursed. So this word bless is basically used in a religious context when somebody calls on God to give somebody protection or help or to make something holy. So priests would bless people, and we actually still use the expression quite commonly in England when somebody sneezes. Achoo. In this case, in the past, people often thought that their spirit was trying to escape before they understood about germ theory. So they would often say, bless you. And we still say that today as a phrase whenever we hear somebody sneezing. In this case, we're using blessing in a slightly broader sense. When something is a blessing, it's very positive and beneficial. So the city's location next to the volcano was very positive in the sense that it made agriculture relatively easy because of the fertile soils. However, on the other hand, it was also a curse. So that brings us to the opposite word. A curse is something that people say when they want to give people bad luck. So it's really kind of the opposite of a blessing. It was thought to be a magical incantation or a word that was said with an evil intent. So and it was, I suppose, commonly associated with witches or magicians. So if I did something that a witch didn't like, they might curse me, they might put a spell on me that brings me bad luck or illness or even kills me. So in this sense, again, it's used figuratively, saying that the volcano, because of its eruptions, also was very threatening to the city. So it had very negative potential consequences. So there we have it. We've reached the end of today's article. I hope you've enjoyed it and perhaps learned something. Please don't forget, if you want to check out some of the other videos, there's a whole channel ready and waiting for you. And as I said at the beginning, I'll put up the list of all the words that I've covered so you can find the ones that are interesting to you and skip to those. So until next time, I'll say goodbye.